My teacher action research will be looking at providing student feedback. Some of the core values that I want to show throughout this project include ongoing professional learning, which looks to engage in professional learning to enhance effective practice. I also want to look at commitment to students and student learning, where we develop current and informed teaching strategies to effectively address the needs for students. Looking at the topic and the problem, providing feedback to students is essential for student improvement on future work. Creating meaningful feedback for each individual student is timely for the teacher. Being able to get the feedback to the students in a timely manner for them to use for their next assessment is important so they can see what they need to improve on. Also, having the students read their feedback for them to implement is needed. Meaningful feedback is often provided, but students do not use it. Providing meaningful feedback that students can use on individual student work can take time and may not be received by the students in a timely manner in order for them to use the feedback to apply to their future work. Without this feedback to guide them in producing future work, students tend to make the same mistakes and not take their work to the next level. In addition, finding a way for students to read and understand their feedback to apply to their future work is an issue. When feedback is provided on student work, many are just looking at their grade without taking their feedback into account. This affects the quality of student work. Teachers need to find effective ways to get students to look and understand what their feedback is asking of them and the next steps they are going to do with this feedback. My research question was, what are the best forms of feedback to provide students that is meaningful and given in a timely manner to ensure that students use the feedback for future assessments in the learning process? Some key terms and definitions I will be looking at throughout this project include feedback, which is information about reactions to a product, a person's performance of a task, etc., which is used as a basis for improvement. I will also be looking at meaningful, which is having a meaning or a purpose. We then have timely, which is done or occurring at a favorable or usable time. Another key term is assessment, so the evaluation or estimation of the nature, quality, or ability of someone or something. And last but not least is the learning process, the combined process where an educator assesses learning needs, specific learning objectives, develops teaching and learning strategies, implements plan of work, and evaluates the outcomes of the instruction. Looking at the literature summary. Feedback is an essential part of learning, for it helps students in gaining understanding in what they are learning and provides for recommendations and guidelines on how to improve their work. Providing meaningful feedback throughout the learning process allows direction for the student to be given in order to reach the target. There are many variables that need to be taken into account when given feedback in order for it to be effective. Some of these variables can include the time frame in which the students receive the feedback, the amount, the way it is delivered, the audience, and the content. The following review of literature confirms the importance of providing meaningful feedback to students and also outlines some strategies of how to implement them. Feedback is an important part of the assessment process. It has a significant effect on student learning and has a potential to enhance achievement. In 2018, Carlos and Bode emphasizes that student feedback to literacy is crucial for understanding capacities and dispositions that are needed to make sense of feedback information and how to use that feedback to enhance work or learning strategies. The aim of this paper is to look at why student feedback is needed, to discuss its main features, and elaborate how it can be developed. Within the paper, student responses to feedback are reviewed, in addition to looking at some barriers that students face in the uptake of feedback. One of the most common forms of feedback has been in written form. In her study, Ma focuses on exploratory study, which investigates teachers' written feedback practices concerning the final products of their student writing. Within the study, they are looking at the purpose of teacher feedback, whether it is to point out strengths and weaknesses, aspects of performance that the feedback is focused on, and the depth of feedback. They also take a look at the teacher and student perceptions of the usability of the feedback. In addition to written feedback, oral feedback is another form that is often presented to students. In a study conducted by Steen and Hoppenbank, they acknowledge that feedback is important for student learning. However, it has been found that students have difficulty with attempting to learn from feedback. The specifics look at findings about students' experience with oral and written feedback, and how they act on this feedback. Within the article, actions that the students took based off of the feedback was explored to create meaning of the feedback given. Written and oral feedback has been the main forms of feedback that has dominated in the past. It has been found that these forms of feedback may not always be the best in terms of student taking the feedback and applying it to future assessments. In the 21st century classroom, there are other ways in which can be proposed to provide feedback that students can easily access and use. In 2018, Kim discusses the importance of high quality and timely assessment feedback, which is central to student learning. It also points out the limitations that written feedback has and proposes an innovative approach to delivering feedback using technology. Student perception of using media-rich feedback is also explored within the article. To continue with the more modern forms of providing and accessing feedback, Zimbardi et al. In 2017 highlight the enhancements that online tools have made to feedback, providing for the opportunity for delivering timely, expressive digital feedback and for investigating its learning impacts. This article aim is to look at the impacts of students' academic performances across successive assessment tasks based off digital feedback. The study challenges assertions that many students do not collect or use their feedback. Feedback will increasingly be a critical factor in student achievement, and the timely and effective use of meaningful feedback will continue to be a priority of teachers for students to use for success. The methods of how feedback is delivered and received can have an impact on the effectiveness and use for the feedback provided. The literature reviewed in this report suggests to move towards a digital method of feedback that is both timely and allows for easy access and understanding for the students receiving the feedback. Looking at the data sources that I will be using, with qualitative data resources, I will be conducting interviews and surveys. I will use interviews as a part of collecting my data. This will allow me to talk to all of my students to determine if they are reading the feedback that has been provided and how they interpret it, understand it, and how they use it. I will also ask them which forms of feedback they prefer and their opinions on the multiple forms of feedback. I will also use surveys to help describe attitudes, opinions, and the beliefs of students' views towards feedback and the forms of feedback. Looking at quantitative data resources, I will be using classroom assessment scores. I will be using classroom assessment scores to determine if students use their feedback using different methods of providing feedback in order to improve their scores. If scores go up within the same unit, this could mean that students apply the feedback given, opposed to if scores are the same or lower. This could indicate that they did not take the feedback into account. I will also be using tests and quizzes. I could use test and quiz results as part of my data collection to view and keep track of student success. Similarly to the assignments, I could track student progress by how their grades increase or decrease after multiple assessments to see if students are taking feedback into account and with the different feedback approaches. Triangulation, validity, and reliability. The techniques I will be applying to my action research include interviews and surveys, as well as tests, quizzes, and student assignment scores. These resources chosen allow for the combining of different techniques to be used, that of both qualitative and quantitative. To ensure reliability, I will create a series of mini assessment tasks that are similar to one another so students can implement feedback given for the same style of task but for different questions and see if their marks improve as they move forward. The same structure and expectations will be present within each new assessment piece, but a different question will be presented. An example of this would be different questions to a reading response. The questions will be different, but the structure and expectations of what should be included will be the same. Similarly, there could be multiple math quizzes with the same structure within the same unit, but the numbers used will change. To ensure validity, when assessing student tests, quizzes, and assignments, marks and feedback will be assigned based off of the expectations. Ensuring validity during the surveys and interviews, I will ensure that there are no leading questions so that students can formulate their own opinions. The participants and settings for my action research. The participants will be included in my research will be the students of my classroom. Student work and responses from surveys and interviews will be the data that is gathered from my research. All data will be collected within the school classroom during class time. Looking at ethical considerations for my action research project. I will be informing all students and parents and guardians of the class about the research project. Students will be given a consent form with the rights and option to withdraw at any point without penalty. The results from the data collected will have no impact or correlation with the student or that student's grade. Any identifiers, such as the student's name, class name, grade, and/or school, will be removed from the questionnaires, interviews, and recorded data. In order to protect student identity, the use of pseudonyms will be used when referring to participants within the study. All collected data will be stored in a locked cabinet and destroyed after 1 year. The place where the data will be collected will take place in a safe, inviting, familiar environment for the participants. The timeline chart for my action research project. Student questionnaires will be after an assessment at the end of each unit. Tests and quizzes will be held weekly during the months of September all the way through April. Assignments and assessments will be occurring weekly during the months through September to April, and interviews will be held monthly during the months from September to April. Looking at data analysis. Throughout the interviews and surveys, once the student surveys are completed, the results of the student responses will be compiled into spreadsheet software with items and responses. Descriptive statistics will be used in the form of frequencies and percentages to describe the results, and bar graphs will be used to illustrate findings. Once interviews are finished, at the end of each unit, the results of the student responses will be compiled, first with each student to see progress with their responses. Looking at the results as a class, responses will be grouped and analyzed using a software program to be used with statistics and compute percentages and shown on a bar graph to illustrate findings. With classroom assessment scores will be communicated through a line graph that will show the progress of student marks after each consecutive assessment within a unit. The hopes are that the scores will be increasing with each assessment after feedback has been given and used. These line graphs will portray individual student assessment scores and a separate graph that will show the class as a whole. Statistics will be pulled from the graph and data as well, being shown through percentages to aid in showing the findings. Tests and quizzes. Student test and quiz marks will be plotted on a line graph to show the progression of learning throughout a unit. Similar to the graphing of a classroom assessment, the graph will depict the individual student as well as a graph that depicts the whole class. Statistics will be pulled from the graph in terms of percentages as well to show the findings. Conducting this action research study I designed will help me in supporting my teaching practice, for it has been an area of interest since I was a student in school myself. Throughout my time in placements, there was inquiry among staff regarding the implementation and use of feedback, and this has sparked my interest even more in the subject matter. Through this research, I will gain a better understanding of how students view feedback and how they implement the provided feedback to their work. I will be able to gain an understanding of what types of feedback benefit students and how to administer that feedback. Providing feedback and being able to apply that feedback to improve work is a phenomenon that is applicable to all and not just students. Being able to develop this skill early on as a student will not only improve their work and learning, but prepare them for the world outside of school.